Hey there, Mark Brown. When you get a chance to watch a legend's legend, I mean, we've interviewed legends before, but when the legend is a legend to the legends, oh my gosh. Like I have seen Captain Charlie Plumb. Oh, he's so authentic and he so connects. And when you get problems in your life, you cannot even think you have problems when you hear about his POW story for 6 years.
And the thing is, he gives you some perspective. And I realize his humility, his heart, his compassion, his forgiveness, all rolled up into one powerful story. It truly is unforgettable, Darren.
Check this out. Take a listen.
We have some challenges? Well, of course we do. That's what ag is about, is challenge. So how do you overcome those challenges? Well, how do you serve that customer as best you can? Well, I think you start by packing parachutes. Let me explain that. I sat down in a restaurant in Kansas City not so long ago. About 2 tables over, a guy kept looking at me, and I didn't recognize this gent. He stood up. This guy walked over to my table. He pointed at me and he said, "You're Captain Plumb." I looked up and I said, "Yes, sir, I'm Captain Plumb." "You're that guy. You flew jet fighters in Vietnam," he said. "Part of that Top Gun outfit in Miramar, California. You were shot down off the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk. You parachuted into enemy hands. You spent 6 years as a prisoner of war." Somewhat dumbfounded, I looked up at this guy and I said, "How in the world did you know all that?" He finally broke into a smile and he said, "Because I packed your parachute." Tell you this, for this guy that runs around the country making speeches, suddenly I was speechless. The best I could do was stagger to my feet, reach out a very grateful hand of thanks. He came up with just the proper words. The guy grabbed my hand, he pumped my arm, and he said, "I guess it worked." I said, "Indeed it did, my friend, and I must tell you, I've said a lot of prayers of thanks for your nimble fingers, but I had no idea I'd ever had the opportunity of expressing my gratitude in person." He said, "Were all the panels there?" I said, "No, I've got to be honest with you, they weren't. Of the 18 panels I was supposed to have in that parachute, had only 15 good ones. 3 of the panels were torn. But it wasn't your fault, it was mine. I ejected from that F-4 Phantom jet at 600 knots, close to the ground. I was well outside the envelope of that parachute. You did your job, I didn't do mine." I said, "But let me ask you a question. Do you keep track of all the parachutes you pack? Do you know of all the lives you've saved?" I said, "No." Now, this is the most important part of the conversation that night. Maybe the most important thing I say to you this morning. I think it deals directly with Beck's philosophy of attitude, action. I think it deals directly with your core values of teamwork and integrity and innovation, adaptability, commitment, passion. Here's what he said. "No, I don't keep track of all the parachutes I pack. It's enough gratification for me just to know that I've served." Here's a sailor well below the waterline of this big aircraft carrier, okay? His job is to stand at a long wooden table and he weaves the shrouds and he folds the silk panels of these parachutes. And he passes them along one after another, just doing his job 10, 12, 14 hours a day. While the Top Gun zooms around the sky at the speed of sound. And I couldn't have cared less about the guy down there in the hole. Until one day my parachute came on. And he packed mine up for me. Hey gang, at the end of the day, isn't that what this business is about? Is packing parachutes, helping that farmer be the best he can be, helping the kids be the best they can be, helping the spouses with their journey. That's what this is all about, see, is packing parachutes. So the question becomes, how's your parachute packing coming along? Who is it that looks to you for strength in time of need? Maybe more importantly, how's your parachute packed?
Anyone can give a presentation. Few deliver unforgettable presentations. What's the difference? You're about to find out. Welcome to the Unforgettable Presentations Podcasts with your hosts, world champion speakers and coaches Mark Brown.
Your life tells a story, and there's someone out there who needs to hear it.
And Darren LaCroix.
Stage time, stage time, stage time.
Ready for some powerful presentation ahas? Let's dive right in.
All right, Mark, we've had many legends on the show before, but we've never had the legend's legend.
Indeed.
The person that the legends look up to. Charlie Plumb, Captain Charlie Plumb, thank you so much for joining us. This is an unbelievable privilege. I've seen you speak at my church, at NSA, know your story, and it never, ever gets old. And you just have been changing with the tides, staying relevant, but you always move an audience with your sincerity, your heart, and of course, your story. And some people have great stories, not too many close to yours, but to the way you tell it, the way someone who is a master at telling. Mark Brown, I'm thrilled. What are your opening thoughts, Mark? And let's dive in.
Well, I don't want our audience to hear too much of me. I want them to hear more about our guest, the unforgettable Captain Charlie Plumb. Captain Plumb, welcome to our podcast today.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Darren. A pleasure to be with you guys, and I appreciate you helping me tell my story.
Yeah, it's unforgettable. When did you first, let's dive right in. When did you first realize, oh, my story could be a powerful speech? When did that start?
Well, I came home from Vietnam. I was repatriated in 1973. And I decided to leave the regular military and get into the Naval Reserve and fly airplanes in the Navy Reserve, which led me an open opportunity to do something else. I started by starting a little travel agency, and then I started a public relations firm. But people kept asking me to tell my story. And in the first year I was home, I made over 400 presentations, all for free.
Wow.
I had no idea you could get paid for doing this. I mean, I was having a great time. My 4th of July speech, which is in the Congressional Record, was one of 4 speeches I made that day. They signed an Army helicopter to me to take me from speech to speech. I couldn't make it on my own. So, but after 400 free speeches, some folks asked me to come to a fundraiser, and I spoke at this fundraiser. And the guy said, "I'd like to pay you for some gas." And I said, "No, I'm paid by the military. I don't need your money." He said, "Well, let me give you a couple bucks for gas." He gave me 3 bills. The top one and the bottom was a $1 bill. When I got home and I tossed it on my counter, the middle bill was a $100 bill. I'm not sure I had ever seen a $100 bill at that time in my life.
Wow.
And I said, "Whoa, maybe a guy could actually do it, make this a living." I wrote a book, and the reason I wrote the book was to stop people asking me questions about my experience. And found out that didn't work.
I had more questions.
Exactly. Yeah, they read the book. They come up with 100 more questions. So, that's how I actually started, and I started small, like most speakers. $50 here and $100 there, and every time I raised my fee, I thought nobody's going to ask me anymore. I'm out of here. I raised my fee one more time, and I'm off the circuit. Well, that was 47 years ago.
Wow.
And I've got bookings into 2022. So
Nice. Wow. And so how did your story evolve over time? Like, what were some of those secrets that you learned either by doing, or did you have a coach? Because it's pretty much flawless.
Well, thanks for that. I appreciate that. And it has evolved. I try to stay current and stay up to date. And it's interesting that every few years, something comes along that sort of enhances my story. There have been 3 or 4 different hostage situations. I don't know if you remember the Chilean miners that were stuck in a mine for several days. Well, the news media called upon me to tell them about what it was like to be interned in a cave with no communication with the outside, and what should they tell them. One of the interesting parts was that they eventually established communication with these Chilean miners, and they didn't know to tell them the good news or the bad news. And that's one of the questions they asked me was, hey, had you known that you would be coming back to a divorce from your high school sweetheart, that the gal held on for 5 years and filed for divorce just 3 months before you came home? Had you known that as a prisoner of war, would that have helped or hurt? And that was the same kind of thing. And I can't remember exactly the one of the guys in the mine had lost I think a son maybe, or a daughter, while he was down there, and they didn't know whether to tell him that or not. So, but anyway, so these
what'd you tell him? Wait a minute here. Wait a minute. What'd you tell him?
All right. Thought you never ask.
We're slow. We eventually catch up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I said, no, don't tell them. I said, let them, they got enough problems down there without worrying about coming home to that. And I feel the same way. Every night I went to bed with my wife in that prison camp, and for 2,103 days, I thought of her. And to deny me that right, by telling me early on, but it would have been a heartbreak for me, on top of all the other heartbreaks I had. So, but other things have spurred this on. When John McCain became very popular, people ask me about John and his time in the prison camp. He was my flight instructor. He taught me to fly jets. Wow. And then he was shot down just 5 months after I was. And so I knew him pretty well. And so that, stirred another series. But, and now with the pandemic, people are in lockdown, and I tell them about not having Charmin for nearly 6 years. And
you go for a name brand, Captain Plumb? You go for a name brand?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, my toilet was a bucket. So, try that out for size. Yeah. So, to answer your question, I try to stay current. I try to keep updated. I study my audience. I think if they're gonna ask me to come speak and pay me for doing it, the least I can do is try to get into their hearts and minds and figure out what challenges they have, what's on their mind, what are their frustrations in life, what keeps them up at night. And when I can figure that out, then I relate that to my experience and what the commonality is.
No,
because
sorry, go ahead.
My belief is that sure, I had kind of a dramatic episode there. My story is a dramatic story, but it is not unlike the stories of everyday Americans. Who has been frustrated by this lockdown? Who has lost communication with those you love the most? Who has been put upon and feeling like you've lost control? Who has feel like you've failed in your mission? See, all of those things were the biggest problems that I had in the prison camp, and so when I can relate those to people that are going through this pandemic, then it touches the heart.
Wow. Now, I need to ask a technical question based on what you just told us. You've asked several questions that relate to us generally, and I saw your TED Talk. It was flawless, and you have had years of this experience, which is remarkable. For the speaker out there who says, wow, what a story. I have a story too, but my story is so big. His story covers years. How do you decide what to include and what to leave out when you deliver a presentation? Because you have so much information and so broad and vast an experience.
That question hits on one of my greatest frustrations, Mark. I have about 8 hours of material committed to memory.
Wow.
And so I pick and choose from those 8 hours what I think is going to fit that particular audience. So what do you include and what do you leave out? I put the filter on of what will that audience understand my saying. There's several parts of my experience that are so difficult and so time consuming to relate to a person that it's almost it's not worth it to try to home in on that particular experience. If I tried to explain to you what it was like to fly a supersonic jet fighter and told you all the instruments and the communication and navigation, the orientation, the physiology of it all, I mean, it would take forever. So what I would try to do is try to give you a feeling, of a feeling of vertigo, for instance. A point when you don't really know. Maybe it's when you first get up in the morning, or we're on an elevator, or on a circus ride, where you don't know if you're right side up or upside down, if you're going to the left or going to the right. And those are the challenges that I would have as a Navy pilot. So, pick out the parts of your story, I think, that appeals most to the particular audience that you're talking to, and that'll make it easier to get through to them.
It sounds to me then, Captain Plumb, that you're saying if a concept is difficult, use a comparison to something familiar to your audience, like when you first wake up, like you're going off at a building, so they can compare the experience and understand without needing the detail. That's just brilliant. What do you think, Darren?
Exactly.
I agree completely. It's having 8 hours of material. Now you can choose. I'm going to do this story and this concept. And Mark, I love that he's just saying, which I think a lot of speakers, it's not about your story. It's about the parts of your story that will help them in their situation, in their day-to-day life. And one of my favorites, which I've never seen another speaker do with the perfect eloquence that you do, but you set the stage where it's dark except for this one spot on the stage. Is it 6 foot by 6 foot?
8 feet. A lot of space. Yeah, elbow room.
Yeah.
And you use that so well in the theater of the keynote, if you will, just showing us what your life was like. Where did that idea come from? Like, oh, I'm going to use lighting to help set this up.
That actually it came from a meeting planner who built a cage for me. And it was a bamboo cage. It was 8 feet long and 8 feet wide. And so I couldn't carry that cage with me everywhere I went. So I decided I'll describe this in lights. And it's pretty, in fact, a lot of people who will remember my presentation will say, oh, you're the guy that talks about the 8 foot wide space. And so now what I'll do, rather than to carry a cage around, is to pace 3 steps one way and 3 steps the other. And then the light comes up. And it's obviously a dramatic opener, and but one that really catches their attention and then is embedded in their memory, because people remember me from that opener. One of the things long ago, a speaker started his presentation in silence, and just stood there and looked at an audience, and for a full minute, 60 seconds of silence. And that was his opener. And it certainly got the attention of the audience. People are uncomfortable. They don't know what's happening. So I play a video of how I got shot down. The video ends with a picture of me in a flight suit in a prison camp. It's just a black and white still photo of me in a flight suit. The room goes to black, all right, and I take the stage in darkness and in silence, and I pace. I'm wearing my flight boots, and so I pace 3 steps one way, 3 steps the other. So all they can know about what's going on is what they hear, the 3 steps by 3 steps by 3 steps, and then when I start to speak, the light comes up and illuminates me in a flight suit. So they just saw me in a flight suit at age 24. Okay, but now I'm here in a flight suit, and it draws that connection. Well, about the second time over, about half the audience figures it out. They say, "Oh, that guy's pacing off the space in that prison cell," and so it's a connection with the audience that suddenly they realize the secret. They've solved the puzzle, and it's a great way to connect with an audience when they know that they've solved the puzzle.
Charlie, I got to tell you, this is just brilliant, because I have been, I won't say preaching, but teaching. We're both coaches, and I was teaching my audience. I always ask an audience of students, what is the purpose of your opening? And to a man or woman or person, they always say, to get the audience's attention. And they say, you are right, but only half right. The other half is to make a connection, a dual connection, to have a connection with the audience and a connection to your subject. What you have described, what you do, accomplishes all three. You get their attention, you connect with them, and you bring us to that prison cell. It is one of the most brilliant openings I've ever seen, and you accomplish everything I teach my students to do. Get their attention, connect to them, and connect to your topic flawlessly, seamlessly, and we are invested. We are right there with you. And it is just brilliant. So for those who are listening carefully, listen to what Captain Plumb has done. He has taken this principle and applied it magnificently, and you need to watch his video and see exactly how he does it. Darren?
Yeah. Did you have any teachers along the way, or who did you learn from?
Yes, many teachers along the way. Cabot Robert was actually one of my mentors. Cabot and I and several, Bill Gold was another one. Ty Boyd, you might remember Ty.
Yes.
These are old timers, and in fact, all these guys have gone on to their great the stage in the sky. But those guys helped me out a great deal. Let's see, I've had all kinds of coaches. I was a drama student in high school. I was a thespian, and so that actually helped a lot in projecting and not being self-conscious on stage and feeling comfortable with an audience. That helped a great deal. I was also in debate in high school, and so those things I think helped me out a lot. Having said all that, when I first started speaking, it was terrifying for me. And I remember those first 400 presentations that I made. I would be in the hotel hoping there would be an earthquake or something to stop the meeting. And so, and I think a little bit of nervous tension is okay. I think that helps you be at your best. You're really on your toes when your adrenaline is flowing.
Well, we mentioned being in that hotel room for the first 400 and wondering, oh man, send an earthquake. Was there a specific technique that you began to apply, Captain Plumb, that helped you get through those nervy moments?
Somebody early on, you've heard this before, is to pretend that all your audiences are nude. And that gives you a little chuckle to think about that, depending on the audience, of course. It's like everything else. It's like speaking. People come to me and say, "Hey, I want to be a speaker, and how do I do that? Tell me about the brochure I have to make, and tell me about the online presence I have to have." And I said, if you want to be a speaker, go speak.
Hmm.
Find anybody anywhere. And so those first 400 speeches, of course, none were paid, but a lot of them were Kiwanis clubs and Rotary clubs and PTAs and anybody that wanted to know my story. And so it was just over and over and over. And, of course, 5,000 speeches later, it's still, there's a momentum, I think, that you build up as a speaker. And once I've seen guys try to cut back, instead of 10 speeches a month, I'm going to do 3. Well, they cut back to 3 and suddenly they have 0. I'm not sure what the momentum is, but I think part of it is just the self-confidence of knowing that you can stand up and deliver and be effective in your craft. And in fact, it's like flying. I still fly airplanes. I have 2 little airplanes, an antique airplane from World War II and an experimental airplane. That, in fact, I'm going to go fly this afternoon. And if I know that if I don't fly for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, it's like I really have to study again what those instruments look like and what the charts look like and how to follow that aviation the map on my GPS. And I think it's the same way with speaking, that if I don't speak for 2 or 3 weeks, I get out of practice. I lose that momentum.
And I know Mike Rayburn is one of your mentees. When a legend mentors another legend, I just love that. And we've had him on the podcast, and he's a great friend of mine. What kind of advice did you give someone like Mike early on his career? What would you give, other than what we've said already, of course? What advice would you give to emerging and professional speakers?
One of the things that I told Mike early on was, don't be afraid to raise your fee. I think most emerging speakers are afraid to ask for that honorarium. And you got to figure that this is us and this is our time and this is our talent. And if you don't ask, you're never gonna get that honorarium. And I have suffered from that same fear, that people are not going to ask me to speak anymore if I go up another $100 on my fee. But first of all, and you guys probably know this as well as I do, is when you do a freebie, you usually end up doing the dishes after the dinner, or stacking the chairs. It is really true that a meeting planner respects speakers with higher honorariums. And it's really kind of crazy, but and I still do a lot of freebies. I try to do at least one a month, giving back and playing it forward. But I can just about bet. In fact, when I do one of these free speeches when I do them for the military or Boy Scouts or the church, and when I do a free one, I said, I got a couple of suggestions, and let's do this and do this and do this, because frequently when they're not paying much for a speaker, they also don't pay very much for the sound system or the lighting system or a place to hang your jacket, or more than one restroom or a porta potty or whatever they've got.
Beats a bucket.
It does become.
Sorry, I had to throw it in. I'm sorry.
They have toilet paper in there too.
Yeah, as your fee goes up, so doesn't the whole experience.
True that.
Because they take everything seriously rather than that. Yeah, it's moving the chairs, and they don't get it too. Some of them with no fee, they don't understand what's important to us. So we're going to have a dance after. So here's where the chord is going to end. Then there's a huge dance floor, and then the chairs. But anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I have that situation for sure.
I do want to go back for a second, and I know I should have asked earlier, but it's just rolling on in my head. You said you have 8 hours of material in your head. Is that 8 hours of rehearsed, prepared material, or just 8 hours of stories and messages? How you categorize those 8 hours?
Good question. I would say that probably 2.5 or 3 hours are rehearsed. Okay, I'm ready to go with that right now. And the remainder would be stories that I have that I would want to think about or even write out or rehearse in front of a video to make it smooth. So I guess it's a misnomer to say that I have 8 hours of material. And well, I do. It's committed to memory, but a lot of that material I would certainly want to brush up and clean up and polish that extra material.
Well, I want to make sure everyone catches this. Here is a legend's legend with 8 hours of material. What does he say? He says, I still need to write it out to get it properly done. I need to brush up on it. I want to record it on video. Darren, these are all the things we teach our Stage Time members and our clients. You need to write it out so you can hear what the audience hears. You need to rehearse it on video. What will the audience see, especially in a virtual world? And Captain Plumb, for a man of your experience, who began with 400 free 47 years ago, still rehearsing, still writing, still recording. That is really instructive. And I hope our friends are listening. Even the best of the best and the legendary still go back to basics. Darren?
Yeah, and if they don't listen to us, we'll just say, well, Captain Charlie Plumb said, bring it up with them,
Absolutely. Sure. Send me in.
What are some of the lessons you've learned along the way as a keynote speaker to become unforgettable? What's some of those lessons that you learned?
Well, the setup is so important, and I will usually go in a day ahead of time to make sure that the setup is right. There's so many things that meeting planners don't know about staging. The lights, the sound, the temperature in the room, the setting. Obviously I've spoken to huge groups. I think the smallest group I've ever been paid for was 7 people. The largest group I've spoken to is about 40,000 in a stadium. And there's a big difference in not only the crowd size, but also the way people are collected with each other. Because I've never heard anybody else say this. I mean, probably a lot of smart people have, but there's a center of mass of an audience, which has to be the center of energy of that audience. And I remember I was in a snowstorm in the University of Kansas, in Lawrence, Kansas. I was making this presentation in Hogue Auditorium, huge building. And because of the snowstorm, there are only about, 50 people in an auditorium that was hold 3,000. And of course, they were just all spread out, and I started speaking and I could get no response from this audience. And I finally just said, stop, everybody. I want you to all come down here, in the front 3 rows of this auditorium so I can talk to you. And it makes a big difference in the spacing and this center of mass. I spoke day before yesterday in Wisconsin Dells in Wisconsin, and we had probably 350 people in the audience, but they were all spaced out. Okay, they're spaced 6 feet apart, and it really makes a big difference trying to get emotion, pathos, and humor, and everything about emotion that goes. Seems to be transmitted from one person to another. And if they're 6 feet apart, that transmission is slower. And so I would much rather have, 100 people in a room that seats 75 than 100 people in a room that seats 500. Just because you got that center of mass right there, and that center of energy right there. And they echo, off each other. And the other part of that is, I think, as a speaker, you have to give them the authority, give them permission to emote. And you do this a lot by timing. The new speakers will go out and they'll tell a joke, and then when they don't hear anybody laugh at all, they go on to something else because they're embarrassed that nobody laughed at that joke. Whereas if they will wait for a few seconds, for some people to get the joke, then they'll find more and more people laugh. The problem I think we have as speakers when we feel embarrassed because nobody laughed is we go right on to something else. And the audience immediately gets the signal that the speaker is not going to give them permission to emote. And it's the same thing, I think, with tears. If you're telling a really, really sad story, you have to give the audience permission. And then once they have the permission, back to my center of mass theory, is that the closer they are grouped to each other, then the more quickly that emotion transfers.
My comedy mentor, Dave Fitzgerald, used to teach me, and he said, you've heard the phrase laughter is contagious. He said, if they're spread too far apart, it doesn't contage.
It doesn't.
I think that's very true.
Other way of saying what you just did.
It's funny. I used to do youth programs a lot, Captain Plumb, and I remember went to one middle school in New Rochelle, New York, and I was an auditorium, and these are kids who were 12, 13 years old. I've been doing it for years. It's my wheelhouse. I get to the auditorium, they bring the kids in, and they seat the kids, a seat, a space, a seat, a space, a seat, a space. And I said, why would you do that? Well, other speakers couldn't really control these kids are going to start hitting each other, so we make sure they can't touch each other. I said, trust me, let the kids sit together. I will take care of it. I've been doing this 25 years, not to brag, Captain Plumb, but I knew how to connect with the kids in 6 seconds. And seeing them, the gap was just, I could feel the difference in the energy. So you were 100% correct. And you caught that early. And I won't tell too many people, but Darren LaCroix has been known when there are too many chairs for an audience, even though to either rope the back 4 rows or have them move the chairs out of the room completely, get rid of him. But I won't tell anybody about it. It's our secret. Okay, Captain Plumb?
Okay.
And one question we like to ask to bring hope to other speakers, especially emerging speakers who might bomb or fail early on, just like I did. I thought, that's it, my career is over. We like to ask, are there any stories of any keynotes that you gave where you bombed and then you lived to tell about it?
Well, I try to forget the ones where I bombed.
Well said.
I guess like most speakers, I've told, and I try to plan something new for every presentation I make. And now sometimes it's only a gesture or an expression or some timing or that kind of thing, but I try my best to improve every time. I also ask for critique, and that's tough. That's tough for me to get. Most people are not really ready to critique a speaker, and I think especially with a story like mine, where who's going to pick on a Vietnam vet? And that's to my advantage, but it's also to my disadvantage when it comes to getting critique from people. One of the most memorable presentations I ever made was the setup was the audience was in bleachers on one side of a swimming pool, and I was on a stage on the other side of the swimming pool, and I tried to speak across that pool to these people. Another time I was doing a high school commencement address, and I flew my little airplane into this little town of Washington, Missouri. And the kids met me at my plane, and I rode with them, and they said, we really need to tell you, Captain Plumb, that there's been a little bit of discourse going on in the school you need to know about. And I said, what's that? Well, the kids wanted to march into rock music, hard rock music, instead of pomp and circumstance, the old tradition. And the administration said, no, this school's been here for 103 years, and we're going to march into pomp and circumstance just like our parents and grandparents and great-great-grandparents did. well, the students got upset and they started to draw graffiti, really nasty graffiti on the walls of the school. And so the principal called them in and said, how can we do this? And they said, well, they came up with this compromise, was that they would march in with pomp and circumstance, and then they would give them 5 minutes to speak, and they could do anything they wanted. They could play their hard rock music, they could jump up and down or dance or whatever they want to do. It was going to be called 5 minutes senior time. And so, it sounded like a pretty good compromise to me. Well, I said, that's the problem. What's that? Well, our 5 minutes are going to be used by the best debater we have in our senior class. And he's going to expose all of the dirty laundry of all of the teachers and who's sleeping with whom and who's smoking pot behind the school. And so I said, well, that's pretty interesting. I wonder how this is going to work out. so it started, and it was right on the program. 5 minutes senior time was going to be right before my presentation. I wasn't too happy about that agenda, but so sure enough, they marched into pomp and circumstance. Everybody sat there, and they had the valedictorian and the salutatorian and a couple of teachers, and then it was going to be senior time. Okay, they went right to my speech, introduced me, and it suddenly occurred to the seniors that they had been duped. They were not going to have their senior time.
Wow.
And so I did my speech, and I slipped out the back door, went to my airplane, flew away.
You literally flew. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away.
I'll fly away. I did.
You know what, though, Charlie? I got to tell you this. It's hard to get criticism. It's a great story, by the way. Here's the good news, though. At least to our knowledge, nobody has sent you nasty email that said you were terrible, like Darren LaCroix has received because he had a critic that once did that to him. But really? It's important to understand that all of us as presenters do have those difficult seasons, do have those difficult times, and do have those unexpected moments. So I have one question regarding that story. Did you stick to your script? Did you not even address anything different? You simply gave the speech and left early in that particular case?
Good question. And the answer is I did not stick to my speech. I picked on the administration. I picked on the students, and I told the whole story. I said, okay, here's what's happening, guys. I believe in tradition. I really believe it's important in tradition, but I also believe this is the senior graduation. It's their time, and they should have, they should be able to speak their piece as well. Okay. And so I addressed the whole thing. I don't think I made anybody very happy. I didn't get a standing ovation on that one.
Well, I'm sure to that particular group on that day, you certainly were quite unforgettable. And, I realize so many of us have stories that we tell, but every single day something happens that we can add to our story file and augment our 8 or 9 hours of material. And I'm pretty sure, Captain Plumb, that there are stories that people want to hear of your life as a POW. But along the way, you've picked up more stories currently that you can then apply and augment and supplement and really, really massage your presentation and expand it with not just the past, but also the present, and I would assume also hope for the future. So thank you for enlightening me and helping me to understand what I can do with my talks going forward as well. Darren?
And I think those extreme presentations and situations, as you mentioned, we all have them. We learn lessons from them, and I think it makes us stronger. One question I had is, you mentioned speaking at churches. How does your faith play into your presentations?
Well, that's another part of this 8 hours is, it's talking about my faith. I grew up in the church and was a very religious boy. And when I got to the prison camp, well, back up at the Naval Academy, I had served with what we call the OCU, Officers Christian Union. What we were doing there at the Naval Academy was prepare lay leaders to be to orchestrate services on ships where chaplains were not available. There are not enough chaplains in the Navy to be one on every ship, and so frequently that job falls upon a junior naval officer, and so we were preparing to do that. Well, I got into the prison camp, so I knew a little bit about organizing, a church and sermons and that kind of thing, and so I actually served for 2 years of my 6-year imprisonment as a chaplain. So every Wednesday night and every Sunday morning, we would have our church. Now, of course, the communists don't believe in religion, or communism is actually their religion. And so we had to, post one of our people at the door or the window or wherever we could see to make sure that they did not catch us.
Oh.
But so twice a week, we would roll out the best rag we could find, and I'd take a couple of bamboo sticks and make a cross out of them and make a little altar and have our church service. And it was a very comforting and unifying time for all of us, because we knew that our people were back here praying for us as we were over there praying for them. Let me back up one moment, because there's something I want to say about your last question, Mark, about old stories and new stories and making things current. After maybe 5 years on the speaking circuit, when the Vietnam War was in everybody's history books and nobody thought about it much anymore, I had a couple of speakers, of my heroes, tell me that I had to divert to something else. That I had to start quoting the philosophers, or quoting other speakers, or doing something else. And so I did. I started to back away from my story and start telling more of the same stories. The starfish story.
What? Never heard that before. Have you, Darren? Never heard that one before. The starfish story.
Tell some of these stories, and I did that, and the response that I got was, "Wait a minute, we didn't hire you to come tell the same story that every other speaker tells. Your credibility is because of your experience. We want to know what that was like." And so, to your point, I have to continue to update. But oh, by the way, those baseline stories that I have been telling for 47 years have not changed all that much. I try my best to tell them better each time, but there's a lot of that baseline stuff. And a lot of good speakers, you'll hear the same stories over and over and over from these guys and gals, and just because that's what resonates. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And who do you think is unforgettable as a speaker?
Well, there are a number of them. I love Naomi Rhodey. I heard her one of the first presentations she ever made, and I've been loving her ever since. And that was 40 years ago. As it turns out, in September, her grandson is marrying my daughter.
Wow.
Okay.
We love her that much, Captain Plumb.
Now she's family.
How's that for a connection?
That's good.
Other guys, I love Mike Rayburn. I've followed him forever. I wish I could play these guitars like he does. He's terrific. Scott McCain is a favorite of mine.
The voice of Scott McCain.
Love Scott. Oh yeah, what a great voice he has.
Voice, yeah.
It really is. So Dan Burris, Dan Thurman, all these guys are, they're not the newest guys, but they sure have taught me a lot along the way. And in fact, I have every Friday, I have a Zoom call with several of these guys. Nito Cobain is on that call just about every Friday. I could just sit at his feet and listen to him. He is just really a great guy.
Wow, thank you. Now, very quickly,
What?
for context, before I forget, for context, you mentioned Mike Rayburn. You said, "I wish I could play these guitars like he can." For those who are listening, Captain Plumb's backdrop on a wall behind him are some beautiful instruments that appear to be 3 guitars, a banjo, and what could have been, I'm not sure what that last instrument is, but they're beautiful. They're on the wall, and they're just beautiful to look at. So, to give you context,
Thank you for that.
these are the guitars he mentioned.
Yeah, the last one is a mandolin.
Mandolin, that's it.
And
Sorry, mandolin.
and one of the people that are watching this, the one next to the mandolin is my father's guitar, and this guitar was never on a stand or on a wall in my home as I grew up. It was always on the couch, and of course we didn't have TV, and so I'd come home and that was a thing you did. Usually my mother would make some little graham cracker cookies with a little icing on it, and that was after school, and I'd pick up that guitar and start plunking on that guitar. And so these guitars have a lot of meaning for me.
Nice.
I wanted to mention one other thing, since you guys are big Toastmasters. We had a Toastmaster club in the prison camp, and you've always wanted one of those captive audiences.
Yeah, literally.
We had a captive audience. We were alone for a long time. Some guys were in solitary confinement for 4.5 years. I was more junior, and so I wasn't in solitary confinement cell for nearly that long. But things started to improve about the 4-year mark that I was there, and they started allowing guys to write letters home. And then there was a raid on one of the camps that forced the enemy to put us all back into the Hanoi Hilton, the downtown prison camp, and put us in larger rooms. They didn't have enough room to space us out. And so I was in a room with 57 guys, and the room was about 20 by 30. We each had 14 inches of bed space, as I recall. But one of the guys had been a Toastmaster before he was shot down. And so he knew all of these rules of the Toastmasters. And he said, let's start a Toastmaster club. And we did. And I don't know if it's still the same today or even if it was then, but he had all the various stages of speeches that you walk through. The eyes have it, or contact, and hands up was one of the speeches where you emphasize your gestures and expressions. Well, the first speech of Toastmasters is called the Icebreaker. Do they still have that in Toastmasters? Do you guys know?
Sure.
Yep.
The Icebreaker speech is a speech where your first speech, so it's pretty easy to talk about yourself. And here's where I went to school, and here's where I graduated, and this is where I work, and this is my family, and talk about yourself. And so I was, he started this club, and it was my turn to have an icebreaker. And I was very nervous about this, speaking in front of these guys. So if you can imagine, my first, I decided I'm going to make up a speech that will catch their attention. So my icebreaker speech in the prison camp went something like this. The setting is heaven. The time is 11:43 in the morning on the 19th of May of 1967. The characters are St. Peter and God. God lifts his gavel and brings it down to the oak desk and says, next case. St. Peter opens the great ledger and says, well, we got to really act quickly on this one. This is a guy by the name of Charles Plumb, and he's in real trouble. So we got to think quick. And God says, well, tell me about the kid. Say, well, he grew up in a tiny town in Kansas, and he was into 4-H, and it was a Boy Scout, and he used to tease his sister a lot. And he used to walk on the railroad tracks, and then he went to the Naval Academy and became a fighter pilot. That's the problem we got today, God. God says, well, go ahead. What's the problem? Well, he's in this fighter jet, and he's just been hit by a surface-to-air missile. it's exploded to some 12,000 pounds of gasoline that he's got on this airplane, and it's topsy-turvy, end over end. And we got to act quick because we got to make a decision here. He's just ejected. His ejection seat has come out of the airplane, and the airplane has crashed to ground. What shall we do, God? And God lifts up his gavel, and he brings it down to the table, and he says, "Okay, open the parachute."
Nice.
That was your
icebreaker.
Icebreaker, yeah.
Wow. No idea.
No idea. A Toastmasters club at the Hanoi Hilton.
Wow.
I'm speechless. That is amazing. And you had the creativity of mind, the sharpness of mind to tell that story as an icebreaker, which proves to us that somewhere inside young Charles Plumb, there always was that unforgettable storyteller. Darren, going to bring us home with this?
Yeah.
Before I get my keepers in.
Well, he had to open the parachute for you so you could meet the guy who packed it, so you could
there you go.
open love and encouragement around the world. And I want to honor your time here. Thank you for spending so much. I have my final question. If you were having a cup of coffee with an emerging speaker who desperately wanted to tell their story and really wanted to leave their message in the hearts and the minds of their audience, they wanted it to be unforgettable, what advice would you give them?
Well, first of all, I would ask them to explore their audience, figure out what these people are about. Joys, concerns, heartbreaks, buzzwords, mottos, slogans, whatever you can figure out about that audience. And then apply your story to the needs of that audience. If you're talking to a bunch of sales groups, a bunch of salespeople, and they just really struggled because they've got this great competitor, talk about competition. Talk about how you have gone through an experience in your life where you were approached by a bully, all right, or where you had a teacher or a coach which was very disciplinary and made you struggle. Talk about the competition that you might have had in sports at school. If you're talking to a management group and they're having trouble motivating their people, talk about motivation. And we've all had all these experiences. I mean, we're all really experts in the things that have gone on in our lives. So tell a story. I really believe that storytelling is the essence of presentations. And essence of a lot of other things too. I think it's the essence of leadership. I think if you can be a leader and tell stories, but particularly as a speaker, if you can tell stories, and certainly not stories that brag upon yourself, and find stories that somehow may be self-deprecating. Maybe it's the other guy that won, and you can tell why he won over you in that competition. Maybe it's a story of a personality change where you found somebody that just did not like you at all, but make them the hero in some way. And I think one of the best speakers I know are speakers that are humble. And Naomi Rhodey is an excellent example of this. Humility just goes an awful long way, and you can't brag on yourself and tell everybody how you spoke to the $1 million round table and how that was, and how you spoke to 14 different Fortune 100 companies. Don't tell them that stuff. They'll figure that out. Tell them things that will relate, that shows your humility to them, and then put that together, write it out, practice. To this day, I do not like to videotape myself. I don't like the way I look. I don't like the way I sound. But I force myself to do this because I am convinced that if you can't see yourself the way your audience sees you, then it's tough to transfer any kind of knowledge or emotion or wisdom to that audience.
Well, thank you. And I just admire your humility, your authenticity. And I think that's one of the things that just connects me to you personally, and I know connects the world to you. And Captain Plumb, as Mark puts together his keepers from today's episode, how would anybody get in touch with you if they want to hire you as a keynote speaker, if they want to follow you? Are you on social media? How would they connect with you?
I'm on all social media. Easiest way is my website, charlieplumb.com. That's CharliePlumb.com. And that has, all kinds of videos. It has, pictures and stories and lots of other things. And I try to be very transparent. And, if any of your listeners just have a question they want to ask, or somebody they might have known that I would know, I answer every email. I spend a lot of hours answering email because I get a lot of fan mail. But I believe that that's the way you influence people is by responding and by touching. So charlieplumb.com is the website.
Wow.
Well,
Thank you.
Oh man, you influence me. I have several keepers here. I love this. You say stay current, stay up to date, and be aware of any situation that can enhance your story. Study your audience and get into their hearts and minds. Ask, what will my audience relate to? And apply your story to their need. Hey, if you want to speak, go speak and develop momentum. Don't break it or you will lose the edge. Don't be afraid to ask for an honorarium and don't be afraid to raise your fee. Also, give free speeches regularly. Technique. Write out your stories. Rehearse your stories. Practice, practice, practice. Record yourself on video, even if you hate it like I do. Give your audience permission to emote. And remember, your credibility is based on your experience. Be humble and tell your stories better every time you tell them. And last thought, don't think if you write a book, you will stop people from asking you questions because they always will. Captain Plumb, great keepers. Thank you. Darren, bring us home.
All right. Hey, thank you. It's great to spend some time with a legend's legend and keep doing what you do. We wish you all the best. If there's any way we can help you, please reach out because you are unforgettable.
Hey there, this is Darren. I hope you enjoyed that program and you got some great insights from watching this video podcast. Now, we don't put all of them on YouTube like you're watching now. We just put a select few. So if you want to get all the episodes, you can go right now to Apple Podcast. You can go to Google Play, Stitcher, or Spotify, or check it out on your favorite platform. See if it's there for you. But we'd love to have you subscribe. Join us every single week for new content, new stories, and new strategies behind unforgettable presentations. Subscribe now.
Check out StagetimeUniversity.com, where good presenters become unforgettable.